I've spent the vast majority of my life hating winter, resisting the cold, wishing to rush through this season and just get to spring. I would tell myself it is depressing, it is frigid, it is the worst time of year. And no shock, every winter I would get depressed. I would have seasonal affective disorder and sleep 10, 11, 12 hours a night. My thyroid would plummet, and I absolutely hated winter. My whole relationship to winter was resisting it and complaining about it. When I'd talk to people, we'd say, oh, it's so terrible. Yeah, I can't wait till spring. But I live in Canada. The winters are long, the winters are brutal, and it's coming every year. So it wasn't even really a conscious thing. But a few years ago, we moved and I switched jobs. I started working at a health food store. And this whole shift in where I worked and where I lived also brought a shift towards winter. Unexpectedly. So there were a few things that have happened over the last 3 years that I'd like to share with you, just to kind of share my shifting experience towards winter, going from a place of total resistance and hatred to a place of being able to actually enjoy the winter, actually look forward to it, which I never ever thought I would say in my life. So one of the big things, and if you know me, I'm the biggest preacher of vitamin D. So my medical doctor obviously recommended vitamin D, pretty basic, especially living where I live in this part of the world. She told me it was not even physically possible to get adequate levels of vitamin D in the winter, naturally. So supplement basic. She's recommending 1,000 IUs. My naturopath recommended much higher levels. I'm not making any recommendations in this video, but what worked for us was 5,000 to 10,000 IUs a day, already starting long before the dark days of winter, so starting in September already. And the first winter that we did that, the first winter that we moved here, was the first winter I didn't have this crazy dip in my mental state. I didn't have a crazy dip in my thyroid levels. Now the other thing that happened, which I feel was just as powerful as properly nourishing myself with the vitamin D, was nourishing my mental state through the story I was telling myself. So every fall I'd start telling myself, I hate the winter, this is terrible, it's so depressive, whatever. I'd engage in conversation with people, just bitching and complaining about the weather. And it became this whole collective consciousness about how terrible winter is. Well, what other experience am I going to have if that's what I'm already labeling the season as, when I'm telling myself that that's what my reality is? So we came across the concept of hygge, the Scandinavian concept of nourishing yourself in the winter, of even embracing hibernation. And that was huge for me. When I could all of a sudden think of winter as a time to be kinder and gentler to myself, to maybe lower my expectations, not worry about killing it and pushing and doing and whatever, but give myself permission to just be still. Give myself permission to enjoy a nice cozy blanket and a warm drink and candlelight in the fireplace. And then to also do this as a couple, or to do this with friends. Not always having to go outward and have big energy and ba. Save that for the summer. Save that for the spring, when there's fuller sunlight and the earth is coming alive. Embrace winter for what it is. Now, I also started reading into traditional Chinese medicine, and a really interesting concept that hit me, in line with kind of this whole hygge thing, was the idea of looking at what the earth is doing, looking at what nature is doing, and living in line with the seasons. So, in the winter, the earth is silent and still. The earth takes all of her energies inward. And to bring a little bit of that into our life, into our family, into myself over these cold months. So yeah, I just perceive winter as a totally different time of year and have given myself permission to just go with the winter flow, which is slow, which is nourishing, which is chillin'. No pun intended. So that was winter number 1, the first winter of my adult life where I didn't actually feel crazy depressive and in resistance to what was happening outside of me. Winter number 2, so that was last winter. What happened last winter? Oh, I started realizing the importance of eating with the seasons. And again, it's so frustrating because this should be the most intuitive thing ever. When there's abundance of sprouts and weeds in the spring, eat those things. So I'm talking about like dandelions, weeds that won't kill you. When there's an abundance of berries and juicy goodness coming out of the land in the summer, eat that. Well, what do you find in the winter? Not a whole lot where I live. So how have humans been doing it for hundreds of years? I remember talking to my Nana when she was a little girl. She'd visit her grandmother who lived in Ontario, and in the summertime they would be canning, they would be preserving, they would be fermenting for the winter. So they could still have elements of good quality foods. And guess what? They were phenomenal for your gut because they were pickled, because they were fermented, because they had all those positive bacteria and microorganisms which help to nourish the gut. So we started experimenting with pickles and apple sauces and even a little bit of sauerkraut. My sauerkraut didn't work. It got mold on it. So still working on that. But some of the other things, and it's been so cool to open up a can of applesauce in the middle of February, and it came from apples in my backyard, and the taste is out of this world. So it's been a really neat connection to the land, a neat connection to the different seasons, and also realizing, again, some of those ancestral foods, like bone broth, are so good for you. So not beating myself up about the fact that I want to lose weight, so I should be eating salads and having smoothies, but I don't want to eat that in the winter. And I remember thinking, like, what's wrong with me? Why don't I like salad? Why don't I like smoothies? Well, I do, just not in the depths of winter. It's okay to turn to the broths and the stews, or to turn to those root vegetables, a nice hot potato or a sweet potato or squash. Again, vegetables that would preserve in cold storage. So we've really been turning a lot more to trying to eat the way that maybe my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents would have had to eat in the winter. Not to say I didn't eat avocado toast for dinner last night. I also had an orange with my lunch today. There are some definite benefits to living in this incredible world where we can get food from all over the world at any time of year. But yeah, everything in balance, everything in moderation. So that was last winter. This winter, coming to the present, the other really powerful thing that has shifted my winter narrative or my relationship towards this season is realizing that there is some hardcore medicine happening with ice and cold exposure is pretty vogue right now with the health community. Wim Hof, the Iceman, pretty amazing. If you haven't heard of him, you have to YouTube and Google his stuff. He is just a pioneer in cold exposure and showing human beings what we can do through breath work, through changing our, or tapping into our mental power. And you can read all kinds of scientific studies about how cold exposure is so beneficial for inflammation, for, helping boost the immune system. So for me, where previously I used to just bundle up as much as possible, run from my car into the store, into my house, and try to not go outside, now I'm really trying to get outside every day and embrace the sting of cold, frigid air going up my nose, and embrace how the ice and snow feels in my hands or on my feet. If I'm ballsy enough, I'm just trying to experiment with actually stepping in the snow or taking cold showers, but realizing that there is actually incredible benefits to this season. So there you go. That's how I have totally changed my mind about winter over the last few years. Being able to embrace her as a beautiful season where it's all about going inward, hibernating, taking it a little bit slower, and nourishing yourself a little bit more.